My name is Stacy Vosser, and I'm part of the product development team as a support responsible. I take care of our support portal and handle the support tickets we get in from our users, maybe feature requests or reports of problems. So I had planned to record this session. So if you could keep yourself muted and maybe have your cameras turned off, that would probably be best. I'm going to wait till the end to take questions. If you have to leave early for some reason, you feel free to jot your question down in the chat room, and I will get back to you. The R39 release notes, or all of our release notes, are posted on our support portal. So you can check out the complete summary there, as well as some of the things that we're highlighting for this release. I'm not going to be going through everything in the release notes. I've left off a few things just because of the time restraint. So you can hop over there and check that out. I'm going to be doing this by user group. I sort of like it that way because then people are more aware of what's affecting them. So I'll be doing it in this order: API, architects, server, IT administrators, users, our end users, and then just a super quick review of the bug fixes that we did. Okay, so first we have a client API minor version update. So going from R38 to R39, we went from 1.530 to 1.531. So if you're upgrading from R38, you're not really technically required to use the new client API, but we do recommend it. And of course, if you're upgrading from earlier versions than R38, you of course must recompile your in-house developed applications. And then this is a breaking change, of course. We did an extensions API version number update of our API assemblies, but this is only going to be a breaking change if you reference the version number with a specific version flag set to true for your extension views that you've developed in-house. Then you must recompile. I'm told this is not very common that you set this version flag to true, but I did want to include it just in case. This is just a small change in the multi-instance extension view, the template that we use for views. There was a method in there called getGroup that people were trying to use to add their extension views to the ribbon, but it's not used for multi-instance, so we had it removed because it was causing confusions. What you do want to do is use the view settings configuration for each of your configuration instances to get that ribbon, get the button on the ribbon. Okay, that was it for API. For our architect users, we've got a lot of things. In our configurable graph view, we've introduced a new table layout. So a graph table. You can decide if the table, the columns and the rows are hard-coded to appear, or if you want them to be dynamic based on the data that gets allocated. And of course, then the data based on your configuration is arranged or allocated into the cells, the rows and columns. All this is done by using a new ID to link the node to the column row, and the ID can be a string or a path query value. You can add edges if you want to connect the nodes, and of course this type of a layout is really good for flow types of diagrams. So if you have like state machine or swim lane or activity diagrams, that kind of thing. And this is just a brief review of, so you have your graph configuration here. There's these new tags, graph table, and then it's got columns and rows. And then you connect your nodes via these IDs to get them allocated. Next, we've introduced support for dummy nodes and edges. So the next couple of slides are going to be about that. Just want to explain a little bit about the new attributes to get this to work. So a dummy node is just that. It's a node that doesn't like exactly represent one specific object potentially. And the edge would be what is connecting that dummy node to other nodes, whether they be dummy nodes or regular nodes. So you do this with two new optional attributes, and these are available, of course, for node and edge. The ID attribute is used to define a custom ID for that dummy node or graph or dummy edge. And if the ID is not defined, it's just going to function as normal. It's going to go back to the default, which is the current object's handle as ID. And you can use string or path query values as long as they result in a single or list of strings. The second part of this new feature is an objects attribute. And this is what controls what gets highlighted in the structure tree when you click on the dummy node or the edge, the dummy edge in the graph. So if that object's attribute is not defined, then it's going to try to fall back on the ID attribute. And of course, that must contain a valid value. Otherwise, this highlighting is not going to work. And supported values for objects attribute is path query or excuse me, path query values. And this is sort of what it looks like. So you've got, this is just some examples, simple examples of node IDs and objects with strings and path queries. And then the same for edge. And some possible use cases for dummy nodes would be maybe if you have a text that is so large that it won't fit nicely in your node, in your real node, data node. So you create like a dummy one just to catch. In this example, I've got the item name, but I also have like an attribute displaying. So this would have never fit nicely in its regular node. So that might be one use case. Another one might be that if you want to group your data, just have like some basic dummy nodes that are grouping data that people can click on, and then the items that they're representing get highlighted in the tree. And you can also have a graph with only dummy nodes. And as far as the highlighting goes with that objects attribute, this is just how it works, sort of this first example. If I click, it's representing just this one, but I mean, I can switch it, and when they click on it, it represents all of these using a path. And again, if you run into trouble implementing this, you're not seeing the highlighting, then check your objects attribute. It needs to be defined, or your ID needs to contain valid values. And the same for the tree highlighting for the dummy edge. Here, for example, I'm clicking on this edge and I'm getting a highlighted item there that's defined by my objects attribute. In there, if you're having trouble with the highlighting, check your attribute values. Okay, moving on, the configurable graph now supports a bidirectional port. So previously in the graph, we had imports and outports. We have a new tag called in-out port, and it looks like this, IO. And it functions in the same way as the output and the import. Looks like that. And you can see how it appears in the graph. Okay. Next, we have implemented support for edge edits and menu configuration. So this is a pretty big change, where users can stand on an edge and perform these types of edits, removing a part, adding a existing part, or adding creating and adding a new part. And these should be familiar tags to you. We have them for nodes as well. So previously, when you wanted to remove pre-R39, if you wanted to remove a part, you would stand on the node itself, right-click, and get your list of options of what you would like to remove. We just made these labels very specific here. So this first one is remove this attacker compromise, etc., from cellular compromised interface. So it would be this part. And the second option would be if I wanted to remove it from OR. So you had to make your selection here, and you can still do that going forward. But what we've implemented is that if you configure it correctly, the user can right-click on the edge itself, and it's very clear what they're removing, what part they're removing, and they just make their selection. So we're leaving configurable graphs, and we're going to configurable grids. We've implemented an option to choose the column header orientation. So you set the orientation of your column headers, giving a specific angle, and that the values need to be integers between 0 and 90. And you can set the orientation to apply for the entire grid using a new options tag up at the top, or you can set it per column. So if you only have a few columns, you want to change the orientation of. So the first option is this new options tag. It's called column header. You just place it in your options tag and set your angle. And this is going to apply to all of the columns in your grid unless they have the column attribute setting their angle. So let's pretend that this is just going to apply to everything. Then all of the headers are going to be at a 90-degree angle, like this example. And then the other option is to place this new column attribute called column header angle in the specific column that you want it to apply for. And in this example, you can see that everything is horizontal, but then you have these two item name column and text column that are at 90-degree angles. And if you use both, as I mentioned, the attribute will overwrite what's in the options tag. Yeah. And of course, why are we doing this? Well, we just, it will really help with minimizing the need to scroll horizontally. You'll be able to have your data without having to, move right and left. Makes it easier to read as well. Another thing with the configurable grid is improved support for including issue attributes. You could do this before, but there was some problems with some limitations with editing, and the configuration was not really straightforward. So we have a new column called issue attribute column, and it's applicable for tables and grids. Obviously in tables, it's just going to be read only, but in grids, you're able to edit. In order to, and we, previously, I think you're all aware, we had this read only equals false option. We had that before as well, but the configuration is just much more straightforward. If you want to implement or use this issue attribute column, you're required to use a new property that we added to projects. And it's a project SID, and you'll find it in your project on the general tab if you go to the project settings. So you just click on the button there and create your SID directly, and you're going to need this project SID value in the issue attribute column. So you would put it, these are not matching, but you would put it right here in this new attribute called project. So those need to match, and then it will know, you put your attribute type from the project and all your other settings you're familiar with. So that's what's connecting, where these issues are coming from, which project they're coming from. So I think that's going to be really appreciated. Next is some enhancements to the meta model graph view. This is a view that mostly just architects find useful. We've added a new max children option. So when you choose to include inheritance in the view, so that you can kind of look at where each kind of item type is coming from, if it's inheriting, you can now choose how far back you want to go or how high up you want to go in that inheritance. So here, for example, I'm choosing to only show 2 levels of inheritance, 1, 2, and you can set that to a depth of 1 to 6. And then there's another option here called show default attributes. And this applies to both item and part types. So if you click on show default attributes, you'll get the default attribute SID also in the view. I've got 3 examples. Here's an item attribute, default attribute, another one, and here's a part type functional component has 1 default part attribute. And another enhancement we made is that part types pointing to the item type item in SystemWeaver are now shown. XML export. We've made various improvements, and we also are working on making those same improvements to XML import. The goal is to improve support for database synchronization between SystemWeaver servers. And so in order to do this, we have created a new refactoring called export import prefix. And this would be required to be set on each of the SystemWeaver servers that are within a desired database synchronization relationship. So you would set a unique global prefix here for your exports. At this point, again, it's we have only implemented the XML export. So for the database synchronization to work entirely, we'll have to wait for the XML import part to be finished, and we're working actively on that. But the idea is that every server will have its own global prefix. And we've also implemented 2 new XML export configuration tags. One of them is valid foreign ID namespace, and this is where you would specify all those foreign IDs for the synchronizing of the SystemWeaver databases. So if you've got company A, B, and C, their foreign ID namespaces would be put there. And then we've included an export referenced metadata only setting. We also have a 64-bit app for exports. Don't typically deliver it as a standard, but we made some enhancements to that. Basically, all the configuration options now for that tool match those of the XML export view that's in SystemWeave. Also, the tool can now read XML export configuration files. You can still use the options as well on the command line. And the tool now checks and writes to a log file, and it writes errors there as well. And if there is an error, the tool is going to abort the export operation. And metadata conversion is available on the export side as well. And again, I just want to note that we're actively working on updates to XML import. That was it for architects. I'm going to move on to server administrators, people that handle the server applications and client applications, etc. I'm sort of repeating myself with their hat put on my head. We have this minor version update on the client API. So they should also be aware that people aren't required to use that version, but we recommend it like for application development. For the distribution of clients, users can still use R38 clients if that's the version they're on now. But of course, those would not include all the enhancements and bug fixes that we've included in R39. But of course, upgrading from earlier versions, they're going to need to know that all of their developers and users and everyone's going to need the new version. You always want to update the server when you're upgrading. Sometimes I get questions, do I have to update the server? Do I have to distribute new clients? Plan on always updating the server. If you don't and just distribute the clients, they're not going to be able to log in even with a minor version update. And another tip, once you've upgraded, if you, especially for big installations with a lot of users, you can always run searches in the TCP log subserver log file and look to see if maybe someone is still trying to log in with a client version that's old, because then you can kind of be proactive and contact them. And maybe they just didn't receive the new client. And of course, this is breaking changes. We have a database version upgrade. We do this maybe once every 2 years. So this time around, we're going from database version 1.43 to 1.44. And the actual operation of doing the update takes a bit longer than our typical database upgrades. And I gave some examples here, so you'll want to plan that into your time slot. If you're running a mirror server, also you're going to need to clear the journal file and create a new one after you've done the database upgrade. And you'll also need to create new cache files for each mirror server once you've done the database upgrade. Those old files will not work. If you're using an SQLite database file, we really strongly recommend that once you've updated your database, that you run this vacuum SQLite tool that's in the database manager. There's instructions on the support portal. And so you want to make sure to plan for that time as well. And this upgrade of the database version is a breaking change. We've implemented a command line argument for clearing of journaling. So if you're using a mirror server, you can now, for example, like let's say you can now use this command line argument for clearing your transaction info. This is typically done in the database manager tool. But with this new command line, clear transaction info, you can implement it in your script. For example, if you have like an automated nightly copy over from production to QA, you can run your backup and then clear the transaction info on that backup file. This is all assuming you don't want the journaling in your other environment, which is usually the case. So, and we updated our server application, and there's now support for TLS version 1.2. Previously, the server was hard-coded to use 1.0. But this is a breaking change because the server machine now must have .NET Framework version 4.7 or later installed. Previously, it was 4.6. Now we're going to move on to users. Just want to show a few pictures of some of the configurable graph changes first. What we did, though, is we improved the layout of the configurable graph so that they render less edge crossing, and we have better label and port positions. I don't know if you can see here, but for example, this red section here, you can see some crossing in R38, and here's what it looks like in R39. You can see the labels are much more easier to read now. Yeah, so you'll improved layout there. And one huge thing that we did with the grids was expanded editability, where users can now edit directly in the grid. So this is kind of similar to what we rolled out for configurable graphs, meaning that the grids are generic views. You can use them with any meta model, any data, and users can work directly in the grid to add and remove items. And the configuration consists of two parts. First, you need to define what actions you're going to make available to the users. And then you need to link those actions to the columns that you want to activate them on. And the architects have a couple of options for input for those actions. It's using parameters, and they can, for example, present the select item dialog for users so that they can add an existing item. They can present the create item dialog for creating new items, and they can also have the action be based on what is copied to the clipboard by the user. So this new expanded editability is a first version, and we may have some changes to the configuration format in future releases, but we're really excited about this. It means that you can minimize your structure tree a bit and just work directly in your grid. We've improved the layout of sequence diagrams in the configurable graph. There's improved support for gate and endpoint when having multiple messages. There's now support for frame inside fragment as a subnode to enable editability. There's improved support for subsequence diagrams, improved message placement when the caption for Lifeline is long, and then there's just several improvements in the layout and the graphed object positioning. There is a known issue with the neighborhood pane, the option that you open on the far right-hand side. It's currently not showing complete information, but we're working on that. We have a brand new feature in the Explorer client called Validity Check. what it does is it provides you a tool for centrally defining consistency checks, and it can be activated on an as-needed basis along with other views. So in this example, I've got the overview open and I've activated the validity check pane, which displays at the bottom. And to activate it, users go to the overview dropdown and make their selection there. It's available throughout the client. The pane itself interacts with the structure tree. A user can, select one of the entries here and double click on it, and the focus in the tree will change to that item. So this pane must be configured, and it does support multi-instance configuration. It has full support for the path query language, and it's fully configurable. So you'll configure the check type and the check name and all of these messages. There's a nice find and filter tool in the pane, so you can filter by column or do a find across the whole validity check. So next, we optimized some simple filtered searches, general searches in the Explorer. Here's one example, item attribute compare, where you're running a search for an attribute that equals or contains a certain value. And this is just how it looks in the XML. What we saw upon implementation for a particular search was that R38, it returned in 10.31 seconds, and in R39, 0.68. I can't recall the exact number of results, but it was very large. We also did performance improvement in the fault tree graph. This is an extension view. For very, very large graphs, we optimized that loading time, and this is an example of that we have. Now I thought I would demo a few of the things that I talked about. Here is, we'll look at the graph first. Okay, here we'll start with the dummy nodes. I've got them. Let me just open the legend here so you can see, because you can obviously use the legend as well. So the blue nodes are dummy nodes, and again, in this use case, I've just got a lot of text here, and it just wouldn't have fit nicely in this node shape. So, and when I click on it, I've got it set up to highlight all of those items. And this is the dummy edge. I've got it set up to highlight the one there. As far as removing parts, I'm going to turn on the edit mode there. If you can see that. So I still have the option to decide here by right-clicking on the node which part I want to remove, but you can now right-click on the edge itself and remove it there. So just want to show you how users can now edit directly in the grids. I'm going to select here, and I'm going to create a new asset. Whoop. Okay, and it appears in the tree there. And then I will create maybe a new or add a damage. Here's my select item. This is an execute confirmation that describes, what you're actually doing, what you're actually adding. It's obviously configurable. I don't have it. It didn't display the first time I added the asset, but so you have the option of having it appear or not. And then, of course, you can remove as well. And that is that. Also wanted to show you the validity check. Got a separate one here. So here I'm standing on this design function. I've got the overview. The validity check is again can be loaded with any of the views in SystemWeave, as well as if you're using a multi-button or a secondary item view. So you're not limited at all by that.
In principle, if it shows an empty list, that means there is no inconsistency in the design.
Mm-hmm. The configuration is done here. It is a feature, so you would configure it here. This is an example.
This is on a Tara, that's why you don't see it there. The checks are on the Tara.
Ah, okay. I can fix that real quick. That's why. I don't think that there's going to be.
Yeah, these here we should have some examples with bad data.
I couldn't find any bad data. Oh, there we go. You're right. Okay, so this is what
this is on the item itself, and then you can include sub items, and then.
Right, you can do that. And as far as changing focus in the tree, you could just double click, and it will take you to that item that's got the error or the warning or the info. And again, these check types are completely configurable, and all of the labels, etc. And just to briefly again, I don't have that on there, but I will be posting an example configuration on the portal, hopefully later today. But so you'll be able to find examples there. All of the new R39 features or explanations of how to configure them are in the application help for now, and soon we'll have examples on the portal. That was what I wanted to demo today. Just a recap, because it's important, of the breaking changes. So you want to really make sure that when you're reviewing the release notes that you check everything that's highlighted in yellow, so you don't miss anything, any of the breaking changes that we talked about today. As far as bug fixes, there's a few for architects in the component graph, which is a standard extension view that we always deliver. We made function level interface optional, and so we fixed that. It's no longer required. It had previously been optional. In the versions view, we resolved an error when you attempted to compare XML definition for XML attributes in that view. In the AutoSort data type editor view, which is also an extension view, we fixed an issue when using max value combined with a negative offset. We also fixed an error that was being thrown in the secondary item view. So when you loaded an extension in that secondary view, it was throwing an error for some extensions. In the configurable graph, we fixed the label size for some shapes. If the captions are longer than the max display size, they're now going to be truncated, and you with a ... But if you hover over it, you'll get the complete caption. We fixed an assertion failure that was thrown when you clicked the clear button in the domain allocation view. And this occurred when you were removing a bus topology. And we fixed 3 problems in the coverage matrix extension view. This is part of the hazard identification extension to fix an error that was being thrown if you didn't have an icon assigned to the mapping item. We reintroduced auto sizing of text boxes in the edit dialog, and we fixed an issue with the display of text attributes in the edit dialog. That's all I had. I'm open to questions if anybody has any.
Well, Manuel already placed a question, but he had to leave. But maybe we can answer the question anyhow in case someone else is interested in the answer.
Do you always need to click on the overview to activate the consistency checks, or can it be permanently be activated? You can activate it when you have any view loaded. And it can't, as far as I'm aware, it can't be permanently activated.
No, and that's for performance reason. And so you activate it per tap, and it's good to deactivate it if you don't use it, or at least don't have the include sub items active. Because then every time you switch context in the tree, then there is a additional calculation. It's usually very fast, but we don't know. For huge data, it might be quick.
Okay, Hans.
Yes, this is Hans at Sensact. You mentioned that there was something faulty in the neighborhood graph. Does that only applies for the R39?
That's only for the sequence diagram. So for when including the regular graph, anything beside the sequence diagram or the graph table, then it works as before. The only thing is when using the sequence diagram, then the neighborhood view is not working as we would like it to work. It is working, but there are some information that is missing. It's a non-issue, and we are fixing that. So it will come in the next release.
Okay, thank you.
But for the other older graph, you are safe. You don't need to worry about it.
Okay, great.
Great. Any other questions? And I'm also open to feedback. This is the release overviews. We'd like to try to do them each time we have a release. So if you have feedback on the format, just let me know. support@systemite.se. And if you think of any other questions about R39, you can also shoot me an email there. Well, if there's no other questions, then it's 9:51. I think we can stop here.